Bernhardt Tiede II was born on August 2, 1958 in Abilene, Texas. When he was only 3 years old, his mother died in a car accident, while his father was uninjured as the driver of the vehicle. Tiede's father never forgave himself. He started drinking heavily and died when Tiede was 15 according to CBS News. After high school, Tiede went to work in a funeral home, where he showed a special talent for makeup and hair. In 1985, 27-year-old Tiede moved to Carthage, which had only 6,500 inhabitants. As assistant funeral director at the Hawthorne Funeral Home, Tiede quickly became a beloved pillar of the Carthage community and, according to Texas Monthly, wore colorful Tommy Hilfiger suits, when not in somber funeral attire, and walked around town smiling in his Continental Lincoln, wide for everyone. Tiede became a preacher and choir soloist at the First United Methodist Church and worked with the local college's music and drama departments, often taking the lead role himself. He comforted the families of the deceased at funerals, stood by grieving widows, and held their hands for support. Tiede visited them days and weeks after the funeral to make sure everything was okay. All in all, he was widely considered the nicest man in town. Marjorie Nugent was a longtime member of Carthage's wealthiest family after her husband made his fortune as an oilman. However, to say Nugent was not well loved was a gross understatement. Many believed she was the meanest woman in Carthage. Her wealth and her status ruled the city. Nugent hadn't seen her only son for years, nor her grandchildren who had sued her for trust money. Tiede met Nugent at her husband's funeral in 1990. Tiede sang a hymn and escorted Nugent to and from her husband's grave and offered her coat in the cold cemetery. A few days later, Tiede checked into her home. She seemed like she had no friends, and I felt an irresistible desire to give her some friendship, she said. The warm and friendly Tiede invited her to shop and eat. They took longer trips together, to Dallas, New York and elsewhere along the East Coast, and before long they were going everywhere together. They made an interesting pair and wagged their tails all over town. The cantankerous and vengeful elderly widow with the undertaker's assistant, who, at 6 feet 10 inches and 270 pounds, wouldn't have looked out of place on a football field. Tiede and Nugent visited several countries together, sailing on the Nile and the Rhine, with Nugent, of course, paying the price. Despite the gossip around town, there was nothing sexual about it, said Tiede, who saw Nugent more as a mother figure and friend. Also, most of the religious and conservative locals thought Tiede was gay, which was never a problem. After all, everyone loved Birnie. In 1993, Nugent convinced Tiede to work full-time for them as general manager. She gave him access to her checking accounts so he could pay his bills and rewrote his will so that Tiede became his sole beneficiary. She wanted him to spend the money on himself too, and Nugent insisted that no inheritance would come to his family, not a single penny. However, over the years, Nugent grew increasingly possessive, expecting round-the-clock obedience and constantly calling on Tiede. Tiede lived in separate houses and still had to visit Nugent's house several times a day. Tiede was Nugent's full-time carer and didn't have the courage to leave. She was so controlling that she felt like she could own me, and I guess to some degree she did, Tiede said. At one point, he imagined hitting her in the head with a baseball bat, but couldn't bear the thought of her suffering. Eventually, however, he did everything to get rid of her for good. On November 19, 1996, Tiede shot Nugent once in the back with her .22 caliber rifle when she stopped to pet the dog in her garage, then shot her 3 more times. Next, Tiede wrapped Nugent tightly in a sheet, laid her in the bottom of a freezer, and covered her with groceries. Tiede was attending a college music rehearsal that day and looked like an ordinary old Birnie for the next few weeks, until he began to become unparalleled in generosity. Tiede distributed approximately $2 million of Nugent's money around town while pretending to be alive. She invested in a Western clothing store, pledged money to the church for a new grand piano, and bought cars for at least 10 people. If anyone asked, Tiede would say he just missed Nugent or she was just taking a nap. As 9 months passed, Tiede said Nugent was in Ohio visiting her sister or in the hospital recovering from a stroke that left her speechless. As unpopular as Nugent was, his son eventually grew suspicious. He and his daughter accompanied police to Nugent's home on August 18, 1997 and found her tightly wrapped in the freezer. Frozen, Nugent was transported to the Dallas coroner's office in the back of a pickup truck hooked up to a generator. Almost immediately, Tiede admitted to killing Nugent, but the locals in Carthage didn't seem to hold it against him. Birnie Tiede's trial was moved 60 miles away due to his enormous support in Carthage. Tiede testified in her defense, saying, "Someone said I could have dropped her off a plane in the Gulf of Mexico, but she would not be found and I wanted to give her a proper burial." Tiede's trial lasted less than a week before he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. But in 2014, defense attorney Jodi Cole, inspired by the 2011 film, Birnie, about her case, uncovered new evidence. Among the items taken from Tiede's home after his initial arrest were 4 books on childhood sexual abuse. Tiede reluctantly admitted to Cole that he had been molested by an uncle since he was 12. Psychiatrists said he had experienced a dissociative episode, in which he killed Nugent. According to the Washington Post, Tiede was released pending a reconviction hearing and was living in the garage of the film's director, Richard Linklater, as a condition of his release. Over the years, however, opinions in Carthage changed and most locals were now in favor of Tiede serving his full sentence. On April 22, 2016, following Tiede's retrial, the jury imposed a new sentence of 99 years or life on Tiede. He is currently incarcerated in Huntsville, Texas, and will not be eligible for parole until August 3, 2029, the day after his 71st birthday.